Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all so much for joining us on today's webinar with Serena Goldsmith. That's on the topic of overcoming adversity, and Serena shares how she lived her best life with bipolar disorder and is bipolar strong. This is a webinar around the theme of World Bipolar Day because our aim is to celebrate all individuals living with bipolar disorder globally and all the amazing feats and accomplishments that they have and are currently doing. And so in this webinar, Serena will be sharing her story of being diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder 32 years ago, and what she has experienced, learned, gained, and implemented since then to overcome adversity and live her best life. And a little bit about Serena is she's a licensed clinical social worker and practicing psychotherapist who lives in San Diego, California. And in addition to her years of experience providing individual and group therapy and crisis intervention to clients with bipolar disorders and other mental health diagnoses, Serena has over 30 years of lived experience with bipolar 1 disorder. And as a mental health recovery educator and advocate, she is passionate about sharing knowledge gained from her own recovery journey, as well as her work with clients in order to provide hope and practical recovery tools to others. And I do want to let everyone know there will be a 15 to 20-minute question and answer at the end of this webinar. So you can think of those questions. You can drop them in the chat at any time throughout the webinar. And with that being said, I'm so excited to introduce Serena. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jake, and International Bipolar Foundation for giving me the opportunity to share my story. I wanted to make a little comment about the butterfly here because I love butterflies, and to me they represent transformation. And whenever I see one, Jake and I were just talking about this, it just gives me that sense of awe and magic that is in the world that sometimes I need reminders of. So that's the butterfly. So an overview of my talk today is, like Jake mentioned, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 32 years ago, and I was also diagnosed with Crohn's disease around the same time. And I'm going to talk about how I was diagnosed and the symptoms I experienced, and the things that I learned that allowed me to become well and stay well. So I break them down into 8 wellness principles that I've implemented in my life. And as you'll see later, it's a little arbitrary breaking them into 8 categories because they really all overlap and interconnect. And I'm excited to share those things that have helped me the most. I'm going to talk about the turning points in my life, and then we'll go to the questions and answers. So when we talk about the term recovery, because you may hear that a lot, the recovery model or my journey of recovery, there's a dictionary definition, and then there's a definition that I like to use with regard to my own journey. And so dictionary definitions are the act or process of becoming healthy after an illness or injury, or the act or process of returning to a normal state after a period of difficulty. And I would argue, or not argue, but just assert that for me, it wasn't returning to a previous state. It was moving into a new state that was maybe even better and even more whole and more fulfilling. So when I did my training with Recovery Innovations International to become a peer support specialist, the definition that we used in our training is recovery is remembering who you are and using your strengths to become all that you are meant to be. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you no longer have symptoms or you no longer have challenges. It just means that you're living the life that is your best life. So I like pictures, so I've interspersed pictures throughout this talk, and that's me when I was a little baby. And you can see I'm eager to experience this world in my life. And these are some pictures of me when I was really young. And that's my grandma, my dad's mom, and me and my cat Squeaky. And that's my mom and me holding my little baby brother, who's 4 years younger than me. Growing up in Virginia, we had leaves, and we would rake the leaves into piles and jump into them, and that was fun. And I always loved music, and when I was even that age, I wasn't a good pianist, but I was drawn to play piano and sing. And this is when I was a little older, my prom picture, reading from the Torah for my bat mitzvah. and eating my first mango in Mexico, which I have had a love affair with mangoes ever since. And these are my parents and my brother and I in my late teens. So getting diagnosed. So one reason I talk a little bit about my childhood is for some of us who end up getting diagnosed with a severe mental illness, it doesn't mean that we've had a very challenging childhood or with abuse or neglect. Or my childhood was happy, it was stable. I had a wonderful family, supportive family. So it really can affect anyone. And for those who do have very difficult childhoods, of course, that can lead to a lot of challenges mentally, physically. But I was lucky in that sense that I did have a loving, stable family. So everything hit me when I went to college, and I studied abroad in Mexico my sophomore year of college. And it's interesting because before I went on that trip, I had a very strong premonition that my life would never be the same. And it wasn't so much like, oh, it's going to be so exciting and amazing. My life will be so blessed by this trip. It was more like, your life is going to be challenging. And I still felt like I needed to go. And so while I was in Mexico, I got sick with the usual, a lot of people get sick with turista, they call it, with the, GI symptoms, diarrhea. And they would treat me with different medicines while I was there. And I seemed to be okay until I came home. And that was the summer of 1991. And I kept getting worse and worse with the GI symptoms. I went to so many different doctors. I was very interested in more natural, holistic approaches even back then, and alternative medicine. So I went to naturopathic doctors. I went to allopathic doctors. They were putting me on antibiotics because they said, you must have gotten infected with things in Mexico, so that's why you're having those symptoms. And after every course of antibiotics, I would get much worse. And by the middle of that summer, I became so depressed and hopeless that I would ever get answers and be able to get better, that I was hospitalized for the depression. And I went into almost a catatonic state. I was not communicating, not sleeping, not eating, barely there. I was wanting to leave my body. It was a lot of suffering. And they put me on a lot of medications and they were not helping. So my psychiatrist in the hospital told my parents, if she were my daughter, I would give her electroconvulsive therapy. This is kind of our last resort. And so I had that. I had 10 treatments of ECT. It's also known as shock treatment. What it does is it induces a seizure. And it's believed that the seizure is what changes the neurochemistry and helps people get out of severe states with their mental health. So I did come out of that depression, but it did cause substantial memory loss for me. And at the time, I was halfway through college. So it was very difficult to have memory loss, especially at that time in my life. Then they prescribed me antidepressants to keep me from going back into a depression. And that was when I had my first manic episode, which was probably triggered by the antidepressants, which happens for a lot of people. Often people with bipolar can initially be diagnosed with depression, unipolar depression. They get prescribed antidepressants and then have their first manias. I'll talk a little more about bipolar type 2 later, which often is misdiagnosed as depression for a longer time. So after I had that first full-blown manic episode, which when I look back, I probably had symptoms of mania while I was in Mexico. We were traveling all the time, staying up really late, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So that might have been my first mania, but I was diagnosed after the ECT and the antidepressants. So type 1, I'll explain the difference between bipolar type 1 and type 2. So at that point, I was prescribed a mood stabilizer and an antidepressant. So usually with bipolar, they'll prescribe mood stabilizers. If they are going to add antidepressants, they want to make sure you already have a mood stabilizer to keep you from the antidepressant triggering mania. And then it took a while for my GI symptoms to be diagnosed, but I ended up being diagnosed with Crohn's disease a year or two after returning from Mexico. We'll talk more about that as well. So it might sound strange, but I'm grateful that I had both bipolar and Crohn's start at the same time, the symptoms of both, because I learned early on how connected the brain and the gut are. And I'm encouraged to see how much more focus there is in research and in practice of medicine now between that connection. But back 30 some years ago, that wasn't really talked about, or it wasn't explained that how much the brain is influenced by the gut and vice versa. And now there's a whole field called neurogastroenterology, which is the study of the brain, the gut, and their interactions, with relevance to the understanding and management of GI motility and functional gastrointestinal disorders. So I just want to go a little more into detail about this because it's very exciting and it's another area to focus on for getting well. If we can heal our gut, we can often heal our brain. So the enteric nervous system, ENS for short, is known as the second brain. And that is the lining of our gastrointestinal tract. So we have two thin layers of more than 100 million nerve cells that line our GI tract. And researchers are finding evidence that irritation in the GI system may send signals to the central nervous system, which is more the brain than the nervous system, that trigger mood changes. So this could explain why a higher than normal percentage of people with inflammatory bowel disease, which Crohn's is under that umbrella, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's are the two main conditions under inflammatory bowel disease. There's also irritable bowel syndrome and other functional bowel problems. People with those conditions often develop depression and anxiety, and I believe bipolar disorder as well. Just anecdotally, I have met many people who are like me with a diagnosis of both inflammatory bowel disease and bipolar disorder. So the bacteria in our gut both produce neurochemicals and respond to those same neurochemicals, such as GABA, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, acetylcholine, and melatonin, that the brain uses to regulate mood and cognition. So our gut bacteria produce hundreds of neurochemicals that the brain uses to regulate our basic physiological processes, as well as our mental processes, such as learning, memory, and mood. So for example, 95% of our body's supply of serotonin, which influences both our mood and our GI activity, is manufactured by our gut bacteria. So I just think that's fascinating. And if you're interested in this area, definitely research and Google it. So I'll talk quickly about Crohn's disease, because if you're interested in learning more about it, you can, again, Google it and get all the symptoms and more information on it. But like I said, it belongs to a group of conditions known as inflammatory bowel disease. It's believed to be a chronic autoimmune inflammatory condition of the GI tract. It's believed to be caused by a combination of genetics and environmental factors. And it's 2 to 4 times more prevalent among Eastern European Jews, or Ashkenazi Jews, which is my background. So this is a list of common symptoms of Crohn's disease, and I'll let you peruse that. I'm not going to read through all of them. The chronic inflammation can cause intestinal bleeding, which can also cause anemia. Probably one of the most difficult symptoms. I mean, the pain when I was in a bad flare was almost unimaginable. That kind of intestinal pain can be the worst pain. But what was even more hard for me was the lack of freedom, that urgent need to go to the bathroom, have a bowel movement. I often could not wait. And so I was afraid to leave the house and had to be near a bathroom at all times when I was having flares. And that really affected my ability to live my life. Inability to absorb nutrients from food, because the where we absorb the nutrients is inflamed and not doing its job well. So that can, nutrient deficiencies can definitely affect our mental health as well. And a little background on bipolar disorders. So now we refer to bipolar spectrum, because there's type 1, which is sometimes what people think of as bipolar, with the the elevated mood called mania, and periods of depression. Although to be diagnosed with bipolar type 1, you actually do not have to have an episode of depression, just at least one full-blown mania. But usually people have both. And in between those episodes, people can feel, quote, normal. And other mental health issues such as anxiety, drug abuse are common for those with bipolar. Self-medicating is something that a lot of people do with substances. About 4.4% of people in the US are on the bipolar spectrum, either bipolar 1, bipolar type 2, or bipolar not otherwise specified. The average age of onset is 25 years old. The highest rates are between those aged 18 to 29. So I've seen a lot of people start getting symptoms in their mid to late teens. It's unusual for people to start having symptoms after their 40s, but it does happen late onset. Rates are similar between males and females, but females are more likely to have bipolar type 2, which never has the full-blown mania, it just has hypomania. Social stigma has been an issue, I would say much more so back when I was diagnosed than now. We've come a long way, but it's still there, as well as internalized stigma, people who stigmatize themselves and don't want to share, what they're going through because they feel shame. However, with effective treatments, including medication and non-medication treatments, many people are able to live full and productive lives. And that link between bipolar and creativity is definitely there. Almost everyone I've worked with a bipolar diagnosis is extremely creative and brilliant and amazing. So like I was mentioning, bipolar type 2 requires at least one depressive episode lasting at least 2 weeks and at least one hypomanic episode lasting at least 4 days. So depressive symptoms can include sadness or hopelessness. Hypomania is a persistently elevated or irritable mood, but it doesn't cross over into becoming impairing or distressing, affecting someone's life in a negative way. Usually it can, but it's usually more the depression that people seek treatment for when they have type 2. And it is often misdiagnosed as major depressive disorder or another type of depression. Because people are seeking help for their depressions and maybe not even being assessed for whether they have hypomania. And that's a big problem because if people are being treated as if they have unipolar depression with, for example, SSRI, medications like Prozac, like Lexapro, it can make their mental health much worse. And this is a book by my friend Sarah Schley called Brainstorm. And her story is just that, with bipolar 2 and being misdiagnosed for many, many years. So I highly recommend that book. And also there's a documentary film being made and you can learn more about it at brainstormthefilm.com. And I have the book right here. Recommend it. Okay, so I like to talk about famous and successful people with bipolar because it really can be considered an elite club. The achievements and the accomplishments that people on that spectrum have contributed to society have been incredible. And we celebrate World Bipolar Day because of Vincent van Gogh's birthday, which is March 30th, which he's a fellow Aries. My birthday's tomorrow, so that's cool. And he's right here. And then President Theodore Roosevelt. I'll just let you read through the list there. Selena Gomez recently started sharing her experience with having bipolar disorder. And there's a film she made. I don't know if it's out yet. I think it's called My Mind and Me. So good for her for being brave to share that and help others. Here's more on the list. Actors and artists, musicians, authors. And I want to give a shout out to Major General Greg Martin. I have his book here too, a good friend. His story is quite amazing, having bipolar type 1 and being very high up in the military. And he is amazing with just speaking and providing hope and alleviating suffering and reducing stigma. So this one, I'm just going to skip over a little bit. Suffice it to say, having both bipolar and Crohn's was very challenging. However, I also am grateful, like I mentioned, because it taught me that very important connection between the gut and the brain. And in learning how to heal my gut, I learned how to heal my overall health and stay well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mania and my experience of it, which can be different for everyone. I saw this bumper sticker on a car a while back, and I thought it was funny, so I put it in here. I don't suffer from insanity. I enjoy every minute of it. So my manias would start out feeling pretty good and euphoric, and they would gradually increase. One of the signs was that I would stop being able to sleep. It wasn't even that I wasn't trying to sleep or I didn't need as much sleep. It was I literally could not sleep. But I would eventually kick into a very altered state of reality. Everything would be speeded up, and I'll share some of the symptoms of a manic episode. Excessive happiness, hopefulness, excitement, sudden changes from being joyful to irritable, angry, or hostile, restlessness, racing thoughts, rapid speech, poor concentration. So I definitely have such speeded up thoughts that I couldn't even get my words out fast enough to match my thoughts. And it was difficult to communicate, and I would go off in all directions with my tangents. And people would get very frustrated because they couldn't keep up with me, or they just would say, "You're just speaking nonsense. I have no idea what you're talking about." Increased energy, less need for sleep, or in my case, inability to sleep. Increased libido is a very common symptom, which can cause people to, do sexual behaviors that are not normal for them, often risky, making grand, unrealistic plans, showing poor judgment, substance use, becoming impulsive. And I saw this book many years ago, and I liked the title, Are You Getting Enlightened or Losing Your Mind? A Spiritual Program for Mental Fitness. So a lot of my manias I felt were spiritual experiences. I felt the oneness of the universe. I felt one with everything. There was no separation or boundaries between me and others, which can be difficult for other people to feel like you're in their space and you're not respecting their personal boundaries. But in my reality, that it wasn't there. We were all one. And a lot of spiritual teachers describe that as a more enlightened state. However, I distinguish it by thinking I brought my ego with me back in those manias when I was not, maybe I was more immature and felt like, wow, this energy is amazing. I'm like Superwoman. Nothing can touch me. Nothing can stop me. It's all me. I am like God. I'm not, my little me was thinking it was big, a big me. And so I would do things in that sense of nothing can hurt me, that were dangerous, and that could have hurt me. And I was lucky in a lot of cases. I think I had a lot of my angels looking out for me, and maybe like hundreds of them because I put them to work. Eventually I would be hospitalized because my manias would just get more and more intense until, I would be held on grave disability. Never danger to self or danger to others. In my case, it was just they would make the case that I could not survive in the community. I couldn't provide for my basic needs, and therefore I needed to be hospitalized. Conservatorship is something that can happen when you're in the hospital where someone else makes decisions for your medical care. And often, I think almost every hospitalization, I've had a total of 9, and I've spent about a year of my life in locked psychiatric wards or hospitals. So that gives you an idea of the severity of my episodes. So in California, they do something called a Reese hearing while you're involuntarily held, and they can treat you without your consent. So they can, give you whatever medical interventions the doctors feel is necessary, and you have no ability to say no. And having had ECT in the past, that really scared me when my rights were taken away, that, oh my God, they could do that to me again. That never happened again, thankfully, but that was a big fear I had. And complete physical, mental, and emotional depletion. So a manic episode would just burn through everything I had. And I don't know how I would go for weeks and months without sleep and with barely eating and living on some kind of other energy sources, because my body would just, I really don't know how my body survived that. And I would inevitably crash into a very long, severe depression after one of those manias. And these are symptoms of depression. Interesting that this looks like a different PowerPoint. Okay. That I'll let you read through. These are common for depression. It's not just feeling sad. Clinical depression is really having difficulty functioning in your life, not being able to meet your basic responsibilities. And for me, I just felt like a shell with nothing inside. I had burned through everything in my manias, and I was just like a hollowed out shell. I was completely paralyzed. Couldn't think, couldn't work, couldn't socialize. And that could last for years for me. If I had a mania that was 6 months, I could be in a depression for 2 or 3 years. And I wrote this poem quite a while ago, but it was, 4 years after I was diagnosed, that tried to capture what depression was like for me. Maybe if I write it down, I'll feel better. Yet my pain eludes my pen. It is too hard to capture with words. It goes beyond language, pouring forth from an ancient wellspring that existed before words. A longing so deep, a feeling so empty, a sadness so profound. There are no words to contain it. It flows out from them, filling the words and spilling over them, flowing beyond them, drowning me in a black despair. So my experience of depression, like I mentioned, felt completely paralyzed, helpless and hopeless, could not function in this world, couldn't translate past experience into present hope. So even if I had gone through many previous depressions, if I was in a current one, I couldn't feel the hope that, oh yeah, in the past I came out of it, so I will come out of this one. That hope just wasn't there. Agony, intense suffering, a strong desire to end the suffering, which would sometimes cause me to have suicidal thoughts. It's weird how my arrows got moved. And suicide is a big risk with bipolar. I've read that with bipolar disorders, suicide is the highest. The rates of suicide are higher than in any other mental health diagnosis. And that might partly be due to the fact that we do have the highs. And if that gets, when someone starts coming out of depression a little bit, they might have the energy to do something to hurt themselves or end their life. Especially if it's a mixed state where you have the extra energy of mania, but it's more irritable, angry, agitated, that can lead to taking action on suicide. So these are resources for suicide prevention. Our National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the US is just 988. Just like calling 911, it's a 3-number phone number that you can call 24/7 and get help. And they're connected with local crisis centers throughout the country. And their website is 988lifeline.org. And there's also an organization I like called the QPR Institute, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer, to help prevent suicide. Their website is qprinstitute.com, and on their website, they offer a free ebook called The Forever Decision by Paul Quinnett. And I recommend that book. It's a fast read, but it really helps people relate. I feel like the way he writes, Like people who especially are contemplating suicide can really relate and gain benefit from his insights. So my 8 wellness principles that contributed to my recovery. Everything is connected. So I believe in a very holistic approach to wellness, where we can't talk about mental health without talking about our physical health or our emotional health or our spiritual health. Everything is connected, everything's interrelated, just like these 8 things. I could list some of the same things under all of these categories, but I just divided them into this because this is sometimes how I think about them. So changing my thoughts and beliefs, knowing myself, healthful eating, sleep, stress reduction, cultivating mindfulness, exercise, working, support systems, social outlets, and spirituality. So when I was a little girl, my mom used to tell me to look for the strawberry. And that meant to look for the something good in whatever situation seemed bad or even dire or tragic. Because if we look for the good, we can always find something. And sometimes we can find a lot. And having hope is where I start. That was what I needed in order to believe I could make changes or even take a first step. If I didn't have hope, why would I try? And that's what I work on with my clients who are struggling with feeling hopeless, is there is always hope. If we're still breathing, there's hope. Even if we've already died, there's hope in my belief system. Positive affirmative thinking, positive self-talk. So often we tell ourselves negative things and we're not even aware of it. So becoming aware of what I was telling myself and then actively changing that to be more empowering, more supportive of my goals was very important. I developed a strong motivation to be well and the belief it was possible, developing a new sense of identity and self-concept. I'm not just a patient with bipolar disorder and Crohn's disease. I am much, much more than that. And recovery language. That also involves person-first language. Like, I am not bipolar. I was diagnosed with bipolar. I have bipolar, for example, but it's not who I am. And I really like Louise Hay. I don't know how many have heard of her, but she lived close to me, and I've seen her speak in person, and she healed herself from pretty serious conditions. And she went on to write a lot of books about using affirmations to heal ourselves. And you can find a lot of her books on Amazon or online. She passed away a few years ago in her 90s. And I just really, really like her work. Number 2, knowing myself. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through these slides because in the interest of time and making enough time for questions. But I became a facilitator while I was working at a mental health clinic for almost 10 years for the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And that's a plan that we create for ourselves, that we list out, like, this is what I'm like when I'm well. And these are my warning signs. And these are signs that I'm moving into a crisis. And this is, if I am in a crisis, this is what I want to happen. So that's kind of like an advanced directive. Like when you're well, writing that if you are in a crisis, you like are okay with these people helping you or these treatments, and you're not okay with this, for example. And that sense of creating our own plan, I think, is very important. It's very unique to each of us. We all have our own wellness tools, the things that help us. And it's making that list longer and longer. So over many years, even though I felt like I kept getting knocked down and had to start over in my life, I realized that I wasn't just going around in a circle. I was more like a spiral. And even if it felt like I was at 0 again, I was higher up on the spiral, and I had learned everything I went through. I learned from, and I added it to my wellness tools and my coping skills. So these are some examples of things that have helped me. My cat Pumpkin, she's turning 16 this month. I had her since she was 8 weeks. So she's one of my therapy companions. Walk, call a friend, journaling, being in the sun, changing self-talk, like I mentioned. That's Pumpkin. my baby. She's very beautiful, and she's a little bit unstable mood-wise, so like like me. I would say diet has made the biggest difference in my wellness, and learning what diet worked for me. So in 2013, I found this book and this person, Dr. David Klein, who coached me in healing my gut. And he promotes a vegan healing diet and then a post-healing diet once your GI system is healed. So I still follow a whole food plant-based diet and also a gluten-free diet. And I make a green smoothie every day, and I put everything in there that I would possibly need, all my nutrients for the day. So even if I don't eat anything else for the day, I've got everything I need in my system. All kinds of greens and moringa leaf powder and sea moss and lots of fruits and vegan protein powder and whatever my body, like I'll switch it up depending on what my body tells me at once. And recently I attended this anti-inflammatory lifestyle training by Dr. Sally Fisher through the Institute for Brain Potential, and it was given for therapists and other mental health providers. And it was very much of confirmation of what I do with my diet and other lifestyle choices that promote low inflammation or anti-inflammatory. So whole food plant-based diet is a more anti-inflammatory diet. Because Crohn's is an inflammatory condition, I want to create as much as I can to reduce inflammation in my body. And these are some recent documentaries and films regarding the whole food plant-based diet. You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment, which just came out on Netflix. The Game Changers, about elite athletes following that kind of diet. What the Health and Forks Over Knives. There's so many others. And diet is a unique personal choice for each person, figuring out what works best for you. But this is what has worked best for me. Sleep is another very foundational thing to keep me well. I follow good sleep hygiene practices, which is a consistent sleep schedule, wake schedule, the time I go to bed, the time I get up. I make that as consistent as I possibly can. And these other things are just part of good sleep hygiene, which you can Google if you'd like to learn more. But all of my manias happened when I was not able to sleep. So when I can keep myself sleeping well, I don't have a manic episode and I don't have depression. Stress reduction and cultivating mindfulness. So mindfulness is a big buzzword now, but it didn't used to be when I was first starting out on my recovery journey. But I did find a book back then in the 80s called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And it was by John Kabat-Zinn. And you can look up his books. He kind of brought the concept of mindfulness to the West. But it's been part of the East practices for a long time. So yoga or hatha yoga, I do that pretty much every morning. My breathing techniques when I need to, if I'm feeling stressed or anxious. Daily meditation has been really important for me for centering and connecting to, that what is larger than me. I love Reiki energy healing, and I've been taking classes on that to learn more about how to do that for others. Using relaxing music, binaural beats I really like, which is sound frequencies embedded in the music that you can use for concentration or sleep or meditating. Exercise, it has its own category, so we'll get to that in a minute. Being in the sun, I know a lot of us, especially in California, have a fear of being in the sun because, fear of skin cancer and having to slather on lots of sunblock, which is important to protect ourselves from the sun, but we also need the sun, not just for vitamin D, but it's good for a lot of things. So maybe if you can be out in the sun for 10 or 15 minutes, not to the point of getting tanned, but just getting a little bit of sun into your body, I found to be very beneficial. And massage is another wellness tool I love. So exercise. If exercise were a pill, it would be the most sought after and effective medicine in the world with no side effects. So sometimes just starting is the hardest part. So if you can just walk a few minutes every hour or It doesn't have to, you don't have to set aside a half hour, an hour a day. Fit it into your day, stand up and do a few jumping jacks or whatever you're able to do, or some chair yoga or stretching. I really like the things I put on there: Pilates, strength training, yoga, jump rope, ping pong, Tai Chi. Finding one exercise that you enjoy, or even that you could do with someone else, is so important for our mental health, physical health, every aspect. Our bodies are meant to move. We're not meant to just sit for hours and hours and stare at screens. Having a sense of meaning and purpose is very important for everyone, but especially I think for those of us who struggle with mental health issues. It doesn't have to be a job, but something that we do that feels meaningful to us, that feels like we're contributing to others. I first worked as a peer support specialist at a clinic for adults with severe mental illness. And it was at that clinic that inspired me to want to go back to school and get my master's degree so I could do more in the field. And then I became a psychotherapist and speaker, mental health recovery educator and advocate. And I don't even know what's blocking my slide there. Oh, importance of social support networks. My family, my friends. Sometimes we don't have supportive families, or we don't have a family. So it's a matter of creating that family for yourself, your tribe, finding the people that are uplifting and supportive for you. And that can take time. And it's good to be patient with finding them. And I lost my there we go. Okay. And I put number 8 as spirituality. This has been a really important part of me getting through the hardest times and trusting in something larger than myself, whether we call it the universe or God or nature or whatever that is to us. Some people are not religious, but they connect with something outside of religion. So I got involved with Centers for Spiritual Living many years ago, and it was a very warm, welcoming, accepting community for me that helped me through some of my hardest times. And I'm now involved with Self-Realization Fellowship, which I love. We have meditation gardens out here in Encinitas, which are so beautiful. If you're in the area, you should stop and see them. They teach how to meditate and how to connect with ourself, with the divinity of ourselves. Like I said, having a sense of meaning and purpose, reframing challenging experiences as a catalyst for learning, growing, and being able to help others. So when I look back at my 30+ year journey, I'm grateful for it now. At the time, I wouldn't have wished some of those experiences on anyone, but it made me learn and grow more than anything else could have. And so I feel a lot of gratitude, and if I could change anything, I wouldn't. So trusting in a higher plan for my life. So these are some of the turning points, which is a lot. And I know we're getting to the point of the Q&A, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I did say I would mention them. So finding that spiritual community in my 20s was a turning point for me, because I felt that sense of community and support, and it helped to take away some of the shame and the stigma that I felt back then. Giving my first talk about my experiences with bipolar in my 30s was very transformative to me, because it was a leap of faith. It took a lot of courage, because I'd never openly spoken about having bipolar disorder before in front of an audience. And I shared some of my poetry, and I realized how freeing that was for me, and how that created a safe space for everyone in the room to feel like they weren't alone. And people came up to me after, they were lined up to tell me, thank you so much for sharing. Like, my best friend has bipolar, or my adult child, or my spouse, or I was blown away by the response. And that was what made me realize I want to keep speaking, and I want to keep sharing my story. My most severe episodes happened 2009. My most severe manic episode, I was hospitalized for 4 months. And then the depression that lasted from 2010 to 2012 and a little beyond. I decided I'm going to do whatever it takes to get well, so that I never go through that again. And sometimes just making that very deep commitment, I'll say more than sometimes, I think always, at a soul level or at a very deep level, when we say, I'm going to do whatever it takes, the universe conspires to help us. And that's what happened for me. Was this job presented itself as a peer support specialist, and I had never even heard that term before, but I applied, I got the job, then I did the training. I found Dr. Klein's healing diet in 2013. I qualified for the California Department of Rehab program in 2013 to get my master's degree, because at the clinic I was working with others who were in the process of getting their master's, or they'd already gotten it, they were interning, and I was training them. And I thought, I can do this too. And I had a lot of support, other people who believed I could. So it was 20 years since I graduated with my bachelor's. I took another leap of faith, and I started my master's program in 2014, and I graduated in 2017. I got a 4.0 GPA, and I was selected as Graduate Student of the Year by the MSW faculty. So that was a huge honor, and it also really tested my wellness tools, because it was challenging 3 years. I was working while I was doing my internships and my evening classes. Sometimes it was 14 and 15-hour days. And I was using every wellness tool I had. And I did it. And I excelled. I call this my final exam from the universe. In 2020, I got COVID. That was March 2020, the very beginning. And it triggered the worst Crohn's flare I'd had in like 14 years. And I thought at that time I would never have another bipolar episode. I would never have a Crohn's flare. I learned everything I needed to know to keep myself well, but that was a humbling experience. And COVID, I couldn't come out of the flare because of all the things that used to work for me were not working because I had COVID in my system. So I was prescribed prednisone, which induced my first manic episode in 11 years. And I had to be hospitalized for 5 weeks. So at the time it felt very disheartening that I had to go through that, but now I see it as like a final exam from the universe that, okay, if you can pass this, we'll give you everything at once. And if you pass, then you're good. So 4 months later, I sat for my licensing exam, that grueling 4-hour exam, and I passed, and I became a licensed clinical social worker before my 50th birthday, which was my goal. It was a few weeks before, so I just squeaked in and did it. And then I was able to start private practice, which was the first time in my life I was able to work for myself. Not the first time, but as a therapist. And it was very freeing because I can set my own schedule, and I can, that's the biggest thing, I think, being able to take care of my health and fit my schedule around that. And doing speaking engagements and training other therapists and other mental health providers on how to work with bipolar disorder and how to support their clients to get better. And advocating and working with others to change our system of care, which I'm involved with now, and it's very exciting. And I think International Bipolar will be providing more information about that too. So, my gosh, this is longer than I thought. My life now, I feel that I'm healthier now than if I had never had diagnoses of Crohn's or bipolar disorder, because it forced me to learn about things health related that I wouldn't have had the motivation to learn about or implement. So it's another reason I'm so grateful for what I've gone through. And I have the privilege to do work that I feel passionate about and that allows me to make a positive difference in other people's lives. I have a wonderful social support network of friends and family and colleagues, and a wonderful guy in my life who said I could say that. I have self-confidence, resilience, inner strength. I know that whatever life throws at me, I can handle it. A sense of empowerment over my health and my life. And I see my past challenges, as I said, as the biggest contributors to having that sense of mission in my life. I know what I want to do. I'm going to help others. And the sky is the limit, just like it is for all of us. And that's my family. Since you saw younger pictures, this is current pictures about 3 months ago. My brother and his kids and his wife, my parents. And I'm just going to end with this poem because I think it kind of sums up my journey pretty well. And then we'll move into our Q&A. At the beginning of my journey, I didn't really know the trials that lay ahead for me and how the sun would come and go. And when it was gone, there were some dark, dark times that I didn't think I would survive. And other times when the pain was so great, I prayed to not be alive. But somehow in the darkest hours, a small ray of light would shine through, and I would find the strength to choose to go on and face the day anew. So then I thought, I just need to figure out how to heal these mental and physical conditions. Then I can finally live my life and get on with my life's mission. But I realized after some time on my path that my life had not been on hold, that all of those experiences labeled as illness were worth more to me than gold. For they brought me gifts and wisdom and allowed me to give hope to others on their path of healing and show them how to cope. So with a trusting heart, I accepted myself and realized the truth of me. And now that I know who I truly am, I'm so grateful for my journey. Well, thank you for your time and attention. And I'll just put it on this slide, my little saying, you're the hero of your own journey. I heard that a while ago and it stuck with me. We don't need to compare ourselves to anyone else. We're the heroes of our own journeys. Embrace your challenges and trust that you can overcome them. So
Wow.
Jake, I will turn it over to you.
Serena, thank you so much for sharing your story, for helping educate us, and a big thank you for just being you. It's always moving hearing you speak, and you exemplify the term bipolar strong.
Thank you.
And so with that, I'm thrilled to move into the question and answer session. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the question box. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And with that being said, the first one is, what do you do or have you done when you begin to feel symptoms of hypomania?
That's a really good question. Since I learned more about how to self-regulate my mood, I am very tuned into it. So if I notice it's just starting, like maybe I'm sleeping a little bit less, or my thoughts are a little speeded up, or I want to be extra social and plan lots of social things. And then I catch it and I say, okay, Serena, come back to balance. We got to ground a little bit. I'm going to put my feet in the dirt. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to get quiet. I'm going to do the opposite of what the mania wants me to do. And then I can bring myself more back to center that way. Sometimes even using food, like eating heavier foods, helps ground me. And the same way the other direction, if I'm feeling kind of sad or down, then doing the things that lift up my mood, maybe eating lighter foods and exercising more with cardio, getting my, my body more, what's the word? Not adrenaline, but the good dopamine. And yeah, so knowing myself, tuning into those more beginning stages so that I can look at my wellness tools list and pick out what's going to work for where I am right then.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to say it's okay to feel happy and it's okay to feel sad. I allow myself to feel those things without worrying because I know I have what I need to bring myself back. I just don't want to get too far out there on either end.
Well, thank you. And our next question, one of our audience members is wondering what they could do if they feel like their current medication is not the right fit and they're feeling unpredictable mood shifts that are caused by these medications.
Very first thing is talk to whoever prescribed you the medications and tell them your concerns. If you're not happy with your prescriber or psychiatrist, do whatever you need to do to find a new one, but work with the one you have first and don't wait. It can be much more of an art than a science in finding the right medication or medications for us and the doses and all of that. So there is a need to be patient, and it's also very important to advocate for yourself. Don't be quiet about it. Say, look, I need adjustments right now. We have to address this right now. I don't want to get worse.
That's good. So one of our audience members is a licensed clinical social worker as well, and they live with bipolar 2 disorder. And they're wondering if you get any stigma from others in your field because they're hesitant to open up about bipolar disorder to their colleagues. So they're wondering what your experience is.
Wow, that's a really good question. Personally, I haven't had any negative experiences being open about my story and my diagnosis. However, I can't say that that is true for everyone, and whatever work environments they might be in, there is still stigma, there is still discrimination, unfortunately. But I also think part of it is how we feel about ourselves. When I'm confident in who I am and my abilities and what I have to offer, then other people tend to follow my lead and believe in that in me. So it really has to be like tuning into yourself and feeling what the right decision is, in what context, and what, when you'll share, how much you'll share, with who, with whom. All those things are important to take into account.
Mm-hmm. So our next question is, do you meet for a therapist for your own care? And if so, are you able to let the therapist lead?
Oh, that's a good question. I've worked with a lot of therapists over the years. Right now, I have one on call when I need, but I'm not seeing them on a regular basis. Yes, I do letting them lead is another style that not all therapists choose to use. For me, when I work with clients, I like to feel more like we're equals and we're walking alongside each other rather than me in front directing things or guiding too much. And so I tend to like to work with those types of providers as well who have that style or approach. But yeah, I have all the support and guidance I need from a lot of different types of like spiritual counselors also, as well as friends who are therapists who I can consult with and things like that.
Well, thank you. And
You're
our
welcome.
next question is, how do you work through fleeting negative thoughts, even as severe as questions in the mind around suicide? And I also want to thank the audience member for letting us know they are safe. But if you are in a crisis, if you're in the US, you can dial 988, and that is now available in Canada as well. And you can also visit ibpf.org for a list of international suicide hotlines. But thank you for letting us know how you're doing. And I'll say the question one more time in case anyone missed it. It's, how do you work through fleeting negative thoughts, even as severe as questions in the mind around suicide?
So I think it's good when we're accepting of ourselves, and having thoughts about suicide is pretty normal for almost everybody, even people who don't have mood disorders or mental health diagnoses. Um, Being a human being can be very challenging on this planet at times, especially. And so it's normal to have thoughts of wanting to leave or not be here. It's only when those thoughts become concerning, persistent, like you're thinking about actually doing something or you have an intent to do something, that's, you've got to reach out for help and support, because it's actually a very interesting topic. Like some people argue, the right to die movement and all of that. I feel like with mental health and overall health, there's always hope. For me, there's always something I might not have tried yet that could help me. And so, since the question was about how do I work through negative thoughts, I would say I recognize them. I just become aware of them. That's the first step, that they're there. It's like, okay, you're there. It's okay. I'm not going to push against you. I'm not going to resist you. I'm just going to notice you're there. And then maybe notice, how are you trying to help me right now? You might be, serving a purpose or thinking like you're helping me in some way. And I want to acknowledge that and see, how are you helping me maybe? And then, cognitive behavioral therapy is all about how do we actually change our thoughts and beliefs to ones that are more supportive of what we're wanting to create in our life. So I think that's part of the process, is the awareness, catching them, and checking them. I like the 3 C's: catching, checking, and changing. So when you check a thought, you're like, okay, how accurate is this really? What's the evidence to back it up versus how do I, what's the evidence to not back it up? And then what would I rather change it to? So if I have a thought like, I'm never going to be able to figure this issue out, then take the never out because that's always a cognitive distortion, always and never are cognitive distortions. Meaning they're not true. We can always find an exception. So yeah, the 3 C's are a good way to remember it. Catch it, check it, change it.
Thank you for that answer. And we're going to go into our last question for the day. And that is, what's a great way to be a supportive partner towards a loved one who deals with bipolar disorder?
Wow. That could be an involved answer, and it really depends on the person. I would say support them in the way that they say is supportive for them. Sometimes loved ones want to be supportive, but they're offering support in a way that we're not feeling supported. So if they're really having a hard time functioning and they need intervention and they're not willing to, for example, then doing what you can to reach out for support, and whether it's through IBPF or NAMI or DBSA, those are places where, there's support, there's information, there's resources for local areas, or calling your local access and crisis line to find out the services around you. If it's someone who's actively, in treatment and working on their wellness and their recovery, then I think just asking them, how can I support you? They might say, I just need to be alone right now, and honoring that, or they might say, I'd really like to go for a walk or go out to eat, or so that communication is important. Sometimes what we think we're doing to help is not what the person really needs.
Well, thank you for that, Serena. And with that being said, that wraps up our question and answer session. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. We hope that this webinar is able to reach you. And if you would like to view the recording, it will be available on ibpf.org under our educational videos tab, as well as on our YouTube channel. And if we couldn't get to your question today, please email info@ibpf.org, and we will send you educational resources that may be able to help you in your current situation. And I want to thank Serena again so much one more time. And do you have any closing comments that you'd like to share, Serena?
I just want to say thank you so much to International Bipolar Foundation for doing the work that you do to promote, education and reduce stigma and provide resources to people. The Healthy Living with Bipolar book, get that if you don't have it already. It's free through IBPF, and there's so much good information in there as well. So thank you so much, Jake, and thank you to IBPF for hosting this webinar.
Thank you, Serena. That's too kind. And one more thing, I want to let everyone know that World Bipolar Day is coming up this Saturday, March 30th. And our theme this year is Bipolar Strong. And you can go on our website under our upcoming events tab to get our 2024 World Bipolar Day social media toolkit so you can share with your audience. And we're going to raise awareness and show the world how united and strong we are. With all that being said, have a great day, everyone.
Bye.